The ancient bells of Eldermore Castle rang out across the misty highlands as King Edmund Aldrich made his way through the portrait-lined corridors that had housed his family's legacy for 8 centuries. The weight of the crown seemed heavier today, though it sat not upon his head but in his troubled thoughts. At 73, Edmund had weathered countless storms during his 40-year reign, but none had shaken the very foundation of his kingdom quite like this. The morning had begun like any other, with the king reviewing state papers in his private study overlooking the royal gardens. The roses his late mother had planted decades ago still bloomed magnificently, their crimson petals catching the early sunlight. But the tranquility was shattered when Sir Reginald Blackthorne, the kingdom's most trusted advisor and childhood friend of the king, arrived with documents that would change everything. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald had said, his usually steady voice trembling slightly, "we have uncovered something that requires your immediate attention." The manila folder he placed upon the mahogany desk contained photographs, financial records, and correspondence that painted a picture of betrayal so profound that Edmund felt his world tilting on its axis. Queen Consort Isabella Montclair, whom Edmund had married 15 years ago in what the kingdom celebrated as a fairy tale romance, had been living a double life. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. For 3 years, she had been siphoning money from the royal treasury through a network of shell companies, using her position and influence to redirect funds meant for charitable foundations into her personal accounts. The amounts were staggering. Over £50 million had been diverted from programs designed to help the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens. But the financial crimes were only the beginning of the revelation. The photographs showed Isabella in intimate embraces with Marcus Ravenscroft, a wealthy businessman 20 years her junior who had somehow gained unprecedented access to palace functions and state dinners. The affair had been conducted with brazen audacity, taking place in locations from private yachts in the Mediterranean to luxury hotels across Europe. What made it even more devastating was that Marcus was not just any businessman. He was the son of Edmund's former best friend, a man who had died serving the crown in a diplomatic mission. The correspondence revealed the depth of Isabella's deception. In letter after letter, she mocked the king's trust, referring to him as the old fool, and boasting to Marcus about how easily she could manipulate royal protocols. She had shared state secrets, including details about security arrangements and private conversations with foreign dignitaries. Most damaging of all were her plans to eventually claim a larger portion of the royal inheritance, using forged documents and false claims about her contributions to the monarchy. Edmund's hands shook as he examined each piece of evidence. The woman he had trusted with his heart, his crown, and his kingdom's future had been systematically destroying everything he held sacred. The irony was bitter. He had chosen Isabella over several other potential wives, specifically because she seemed to genuinely care about charitable work and the common people. Her passion for social causes had been one of the qualities that most attracted him to her. Sir Reginald explained how the discovery had come about. Palace security had noticed irregularities in Isabella's schedule and the presence of unauthorized individuals in restricted areas. A discreet investigation had been launched, initially to ensure the Queen's safety, but it had uncovered evidence of her criminal activities. The investigation team, led by the kingdom's most skilled intelligence officers, had spent months gathering irrefutable proof before bringing their findings to the king's attention. The political implications were staggering. Isabella's actions had not only threatened the financial stability of numerous charitable organizations, but had also compromised national security. Foreign intelligence services could have easily exploited her careless handling of sensitive information. The scandal would rock the kingdom's relationship with allied nations and potentially destabilize the carefully maintained balance of power in the region. As Edmund processed this betrayal, he thought about the thousands of citizens who had suffered because of Isabella's greed, the children's hospital that had to delay crucial renovations, the scholarship programs that had been mysteriously underfunded, the disaster relief efforts that had fallen short of their goals. All because money meant to help them had been stolen by the very person who was supposed to be their advocate. The king's mind raced through the personal moments that now seemed tainted by deception. Isabella's tears when discussing the plight of orphaned children, her passionate speeches about social justice, her apparent dedication to royal duties. All of it had been an elaborate performance designed to maintain her position and continue her theft. Even their private moments together were now suspect. as Edmund realized how often Isabella had steered conversations toward topics that might yield useful information for her schemes. The afternoon sun was setting behind the castle towers when Edmund finally made his decision. The evidence was clear, the betrayal complete, and his duty to the kingdom paramount. He summoned the Privy Council, the kingdom's highest governing body, to an emergency session. The great council chamber, with its ancient oak table and portraits of previous monarchs, had witnessed many historic decisions, but none quite like this. As the councillors filed in, their faces grave with the knowledge of what was to come, Edmund felt the full weight of kingship upon his shoulders. He was about to make a decision that would reverberate through history, one that would be studied and debated long after he was gone. But there was no alternative. Isabella's actions had left him no choice. The crown, the kingdom, and the trust of his people demanded nothing less than complete and decisive action. The emergency session of the Privy Council convened at sunset, the golden light streaming through the stained glass windows of the ancient chamber creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that belied the gravity of the situation. 12 of the kingdom's most senior officials sat around the circular table that had been carved from a single oak tree over 4 centuries ago, their faces reflecting the shock and dismay that had rippled through the upper echelons of the palace throughout the day. King Edmund entered the chamber with the bearing of a man who had made peace with an impossible decision. Behind him walked Sir Reginald, carrying the damning evidence that would forever change the course of the monarchy. The king's personal secretary, Dame Margaret Ashworth, followed with additional documentation that had been discovered in the hours since the initial revelation. The atmosphere was thick with tension as everyone present understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the kingdom's history. Lord Chancellor Harrison Blackwood, a distinguished man in his 60s who had served the crown for over 3 decades, called the session to order. His voice, usually commanding and clear, carried a note of solemnity that emphasized the unprecedented nature of the gathering. Around the table sat the kingdom's most powerful figures, the Lord Treasurer, the Foreign Secretary, the Defense Minister, the Archbishop of Eldermoor, and other high-ranking officials whose collective wisdom had guided the realm through numerous crises. Edmund stood before them, still wearing the simple mourning attire he had donned hours earlier, before his world had been turned upside down. He had chosen not to wear his ceremonial robes or crown for this meeting, wanting to address his counselors not just as their sovereign, but as a man who had been deeply wronged and who now sought justice for his kingdom and its people. "My lords and ladies," the king began, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil within, "I have called you here to address a matter of the utmost gravity that threatens the very foundation of our monarchy and the welfare of our people." He gestured to Sir Reginald, who began distributing copies of the evidence to each council member. The rustle of papers and sharp intakes of breath filled the chamber as the councillors absorbed the shocking details of Isabella's betrayal. The financial documents painted a picture of systematic theft that had been occurring right under their noses. Isabella had used her position to establish fake charitable organizations, complete with legitimate-sounding names and fabricated mission statements. She had convinced well-meaning donors to contribute to these false charities, then funneled the money into accounts controlled by her lover, Marcus Ravencroft. The scheme was sophisticated, involving multiple countries and banking systems, suggesting a level of premeditation that made her crimes all the more heinous. Lord Treasurer Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, a meticulous man known for his attention to financial detail, was visibly shaken as he reviewed the monetary evidence. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the implications of this theft extend far beyond the immediate financial loss. The Queen's actions have undermined public trust in our charitable institutions and could potentially expose the Crown to legal liability from donors who believed they were contributing to legitimate causes." The Foreign Secretary, Lady Catherine Ashford, raised concerns about the international ramifications. Isabella's relationship with Marcus had taken them to numerous foreign countries, where they had attended diplomatic functions and social events as representatives of the kingdom. The photographs and communications suggested that state secrets might have been compromised during pillow talk or casual conversations, potentially damaging relationships with allied nations and giving adversaries valuable intelligence about the kingdom's policies and strategic thinking. Defense Minister Admiral Robert Sterling highlighted the security breaches that had occurred. Isabella's lover had gained access to restricted areas of the palace, including the war room where sensitive military briefings took place. His presence at state dinners had put him in proximity to foreign dignitaries and military officials, creating opportunities for espionage that could have had catastrophic consequences for national security. The Archbishop of Eldermore, the Most Reverend Thomas Fairfax, addressed the moral and spiritual dimensions of the crisis. As the kingdom's highest religious authority, he spoke about the sacred nature of the marriage vows that Isabella had broken and the trust she had violated not just with the king, but with the entire nation. The monarchy's moral authority, he explained, was fundamental to its legitimacy, and Isabella's actions had struck at the very heart of that authority. As the discussion continued, it became clear that the scope of Isabella's deception was even broader than initially understood. Dame Margaret presented evidence that the Queen had been manipulating palace staff, using her charm and authority to extract information about the king's schedule, private meetings, and personal habits. She had cultivated relationships with key personnel, showering them with gifts and special privileges in exchange for their loyalty and information. The psychological impact on King Edmund was evident to all present. This was not merely a political crisis or a financial scandal. It was a profound personal betrayal that had shattered the king's faith in his own judgment. The woman he had welcomed into his life and trusted with his most intimate thoughts had been systematically undermining everything he stood for. The council members could see the pain in their sovereign's eyes, even as he maintained his composure and focused on his duty to the kingdom. Lady Ashford raised the delicate question of timing and public relations. How and when should this information be revealed to the public? The kingdom's citizens had embraced Isabella as their queen, admiring her apparent dedication to charitable causes and her warm public persona. The revelation of her true nature would shock and disappoint millions of people who had believed in her sincerity. The discussion turned to legal precedents and constitutional law. While the kingdom had procedures for addressing crimes committed by members of the royal family, nothing in recent history compared to the scope and nature of Isabella's betrayal. Legal scholars would need to be consulted, and constitutional experts would have to determine the proper procedures for stripping her of titles and removing her from the line of succession. Sir Reginald presented additional evidence that had been discovered in Isabella's private chambers, including encrypted communication devices and financial documents hidden in secret compartments. The sophistication of her operation suggested that she had been planning this deception for years, possibly even before her marriage to the king. The realization that their relationship might have been built on a foundation of lies from the very beginning added another layer of devastation to an already overwhelming situation. As the evening wore on and the full magnitude of the betrayal became clear, the Privy Council reached a unanimous conclusion. Isabella's actions constituted treason of the highest order, and she could not be permitted to retain her titles, privileges, or position within the royal family. The king's duty to his people and his kingdom demanded swift and decisive action, regardless of the personal cost to himself. The dawn of the following day brought no relief to King Edmund, who had spent a sleepless night in his private chambers, wrestling with the enormity of the task that lay ahead. The palace, usually bustling with the routine activities of court life, felt eerily quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation of the storm that was about to break. Word of the emergency council session had spread through the upper levels of the government, creating an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that permeated every corner of the ancient building. Queen Consort Isabella remained blissfully unaware of the discovery of her crimes, having spent the previous evening at what she believed was a private charity gala in the capital city. In reality, her movements had been carefully monitored by palace security, who were now tasked with the delicate operation of ensuring she did not flee the kingdom before facing justice. The irony was not lost on the king that Isabella's final public appearance before her downfall had been at yet another charitable event, where she had played her role as the caring, compassionate queen to perfection. Sir Reginald arrived at the king's study as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the heavy curtains. In his hands, he carried the formal documents that had been prepared throughout the night by the kingdom's finest legal minds. The papers represented the culmination of centuries of constitutional law and royal protocol, adapted to address a situation that none of the kingdom's founders could have anticipated. The language was precise, unambiguous, and devastating in its implications. The royal decree of annulment and divestiture was a document unlike any that had been issued in the kingdom's long history. It would strip Isabella of her title as queen consort, remove her from any position in the line of succession, annul her marriage to the king on the grounds of fraud and deception, confiscate all properties and assets granted to her through royal privilege, and ban her from entering any royal residence or participating in any official function of the crown. Additionally, it would initiate criminal proceedings against her for theft, fraud, and treason. King Edmund reviewed each section of the document with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that history would judge every word. The legal justifications were ironclad, based not only on Isabella's criminal actions, but also on the revelation that she had entered into the marriage under false pretenses, concealing her true intentions and character from both the king and the kingdom's people. The marriage contract, which had been celebrated by millions and seen as a symbol of hope and renewal for the monarchy, was revealed to be built on a foundation of lies. The king's private secretary, Dame Margaret, entered with additional documentation that had been discovered during the night. Isabella's personal correspondence revealed the true depth of her contempt for the royal family and the kingdom's traditions. In letters to Marcus Ravenscroft, she had mocked the formal protocols of court life, ridiculed the king's dedication to duty, and expressed her intention to modernize the monarchy by stripping away what she called outdated traditions and meaningless ceremonies. More damaging still were her communications with foreign contacts, including several individuals who were known to have connections with hostile intelligence services. While there was no direct evidence that Isabella had intentionally engaged in espionage, her careless sharing of information and her willingness to discuss state affairs with unauthorized persons had created numerous opportunities for foreign powers to gain insight into the kingdom's policies and strategic planning. The investigation had also uncovered evidence of Isabella's manipulation of the kingdom's charitable sector. She had used her influence to pressure legitimate charities into partnering with her fake organizations, threatening to withdraw royal patronage if they did not comply. Several charity directors had privately expressed discomfort with these arrangements but had felt powerless to resist the Queen's demands. The result was a web of financial entanglements that had corrupted the entire charitable ecosystem of the kingdom. As the morning progressed, key members of the government began arriving at the palace for what would be one of the most dramatic confrontations in the monarchy's history. The Attorney General, Sir James Morrison, had worked through the night to ensure that all legal procedures were properly followed and that Isabella's rights were protected even as justice was pursued. The goal was not vengeance, but the restoration of integrity to the crown and protection for the kingdom's interests. The Foreign Secretary had been in contact with allied nations throughout the night, preparing them for the announcement that would surely generate international headlines. The kingdom's reputation for stability and moral leadership was at stake, and it was crucial that the response to Isabella's crimes be seen as principled and just, rather than arbitrary or vindictive. Diplomatic channels were buzzing with activity as embassies prepared their reports and foreign governments assessed the potential implications for their relationships with the kingdom. Meanwhile, the palace's security apparatus was implementing unprecedented measures to protect both the king and the integrity of the evidence. Every entrance to the palace was secured. All communication systems were monitored for potential security breaches, and a team of expert investigators continued to search for any additional evidence of Isabella's criminal activities. The possibility that she had accomplices within the palace staff or government could not be ruled out, making trust a precious commodity in the corridors of power. The king spent the morning in consultation with constitutional scholars and legal experts, ensuring that every aspect of the planned action was consistent with the kingdom's laws and traditions. The monarch's power to strip titles and dissolve marriages was ancient and well established, but it had been centuries since such drastic action had been necessary. The precedents were clear, but their application to a modern context required careful consideration of both legal and political factors. Religious leaders from across the kingdom had been quietly informed of the situation, as the church's support would be crucial for maintaining public confidence in the monarchy's moral authority. The Archbishop of Eldermore had already indicated his support for the king's actions, emphasizing that the sanctity of marriage could not be maintained when one party had entered into the union with fraudulent intentions. The church's position would help legitimize the annulment in the eyes of the faithful and provide moral grounding for the king's decisions. As noon approached, final preparations were made for Isabella's confrontation with the evidence of her crimes. The Queen had been summoned to the palace under the pretense of discussing upcoming charitable events, maintaining the illusion that her secret life remained hidden. The king had decided that she should be given the opportunity to confess her crimes and cooperate with the investigation. though he held little hope that she would display the integrity that had been so notably absent from her previous actions. The great throne room was prepared for what would be Isabella's final appearance as queen consort. The ancient hall, with its soaring ceilings and magnificent tapestries depicting the kingdom's glorious history, would witness the end of a chapter that the kingdom would prefer to forget. King Edmund took his place on the throne that had been occupied by his ancestors for over 8 centuries, the weight of their legacy pressing down upon him as he prepared to defend the honor they had built through generations of dedicated service. The irony of the situation was not lost on the king. Isabella had often complained about the formality and tradition of royal ceremonies, preferring modern casual approaches to her duties. Now, she would face the full weight of royal tradition as the crown exercised its ancient prerogatives to protect itself and the kingdom from her betrayal. The very traditions she had mocked would be the instruments of her downfall. The great doors of the throne room opened with a resounding echo that seemed to announce the gravity of what was about to unfold. Queen consort Isabella entered with her characteristic confidence, her designer gown flowing elegantly behind her as she walked across the ancient stone floor toward the throne where King Edmund sat in solemn judgment. She appeared radiant and self-assured, completely unaware that her world was about to crumble around her. Her smile was warm and genuine, the same expression that had charmed the kingdom's people and, tragically, the king himself for so many years. Isabella had dressed carefully for what she believed would be a routine discussion about upcoming royal engagements. Her emerald green dress, adorned with the diamonds the king had given her for their 10th anniversary, sparkled in the light streaming through the massive stained glass windows. The irony was devastating. She wore the symbols of royal favor and the king's affection even as she faced accusations that would strip her of everything she had gained through deception. The throne room, normally filled with courtiers and officials during formal ceremonies, was occupied by only a select few, the members of the Privy Council, the Attorney General, Sir Reginald, and a small contingent of palace guards. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Isabella's experienced eye immediately recognized that this was no ordinary meeting. Her step faltered slightly as she noticed the grim expressions of the assembled officials, but she quickly recovered her composure and continued toward the throne with practiced grace. King Edmund studied his wife's face as she approached, searching for any sign of guilt or awareness of her crimes. What he saw instead was the same polished performance that had deceived him for years. The perfect smile, the calculated charm, the apparent sincerity that had masked such profound dishonesty. The realization that he might never have truly known the real Isabella added another layer of pain to an already devastating situation. "Your Majesty," Isabella said, offering a graceful curtsy as she reached the appropriate distance from the throne. Her voice carried the musical quality that had first enchanted the king, but now it sounded hollow and false to his ears. "I received your summons and came immediately. I hope there's nothing wrong with the Children's Hospital fundraiser next week. I've been looking forward to it so much." The mention of charity work, the very area where her crimes had been most heinous, struck the king like a physical blow. Even now, faced with the assembled power of the crown, Isabella continued to play her role as the caring, dedicated queen who lived only to serve others. The audacity of her performance was breathtaking, and it reinforced his conviction that the actions he was about to take were not only justified but essential. Sir Reginald stepped forward, his face grave as he carried a leather portfolio containing the evidence that would destroy Isabella's carefully constructed facade. "Your Majesty," he addressed the king formally, "shall I present the evidence we discussed?" King Edmund nodded silently, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face as he watched for her reaction to the unfolding drama. As Sir Reginald began to display photographs and financial documents on easels that had been prepared for the presentation, Isabella's expression gradually shifted from confusion to alarm. The first photograph showed her in Marquis Ravencroft's arms on a yacht in the French Riviera, their intimate embrace leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Her face paled visibly, but she maintained her composure, though the practiced smile finally began to fade. "I can explain," Isabella began, her voice taking on a defensive tone that was utterly different from her usual melodious speaking manner. "Marcus is an old friend, and that photograph is taken completely out of context. We were simply—" "Silence!" King Edmund commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of 8 centuries of royal power. The single word echoed through the vast chamber, cutting through Isabella's explanation like a blade. "You will listen to the evidence in its entirety before you speak again." The financial documents were presented next, showing the elaborate network of false charities and fraudulent accounts that Isabella had created over the past 3 years. Bank statements revealed millions of pounds that had been diverted from legitimate charitable causes into accounts controlled by Marcus Ravencroft. The paper trail was meticulously documented, showing how Isabella had used her royal position to convince donors to contribute to causes that existed only to enrich her lover and herself. Isabella's breathing became increasingly rapid as the scope of the evidence became clear. Her hands, which had remained steady throughout countless royal ceremonies and public appearances, began to tremble visibly. The mask of royal composure was finally slipping, revealing the desperate woman beneath, who realized that her crimes had been discovered and that her position was in mortal jeopardy. The Attorney General, Sir James Morrison, stepped forward to present the legal implications of Isabella's actions. His voice was clinical and precise as he outlined the charges that would be brought against her: grand theft, fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and high treason. Each charge carried severe penalties, and the cumulative effect would likely result in decades of imprisonment if she were convicted. The treason charge alone, based on her sharing of state secrets with unauthorized persons, could theoretically carry a sentence of life imprisonment. "The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable," Sir James continued, his words falling like hammer blows in the silent chamber. "The Crown has documented every transaction, every meeting, every communication that supports these charges. Your actions have not only betrayed the trust of His Majesty, but have also endangered the security of the realm and stolen from the most vulnerable members of our society." Isabella's composure finally shattered completely. The elegant queen who had graced countless state dinners and charmed foreign dignitaries was replaced by a desperate woman whose world was collapsing around her. Tears began to stream down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup and staining the bodice of her elegant gown. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely recognizable. "You don't understand," she pleaded, looking directly at King Edmund with an expression of desperate appeal. "Everything I did was for us, for our future. Marcus means nothing to me. He was just a means to an end. The money was supposed to be an investment in our security, our independence from the constraints of this ancient system." King Edmund felt a surge of revulsion at her words. Even now, caught red-handed in her crimes, Isabella was attempting to justify her betrayal as somehow being in their mutual interest. The depth of her delusion was staggering, and it confirmed his belief that she was fundamentally incapable of understanding the magnitude of her crimes or the pain she had caused. "You have stolen from orphans and widows," the king replied, his voice heavy with disgust. "You have betrayed state secrets to your lover and compromised the security of this realm. You have made a mockery of the sacred vows we exchanged and turned our marriage into a criminal enterprise. There is no justification for what you have done, and there will be no mercy." The formal pronouncement began with the reading of the royal decree that had been prepared through the night. Lord Chancellor Harrison Blackwood stepped forward with the ancient scroll that would officially strip Isabella of all her titles, privileges, and rights as a member of the royal family. His voice carried the weight of centuries of legal tradition as he began to recite the formal language that would sever all connections between Isabella and the crown. Isabella collapsed to her knees as the full implications of the decree became clear. Her sobs echoed through the vast chamber, a stark contrast to the measured, formal tone of the legal proceedings. She was no longer the confident, charming woman who had entered the throne room just minutes earlier. She was simply a criminal who had been caught and was about to face the consequences of her actions. The final words of the royal decree echoed through the throne room like a death knell, officially severing every legal, ceremonial, and personal connection between Isabella Montclair and the royal family of Eldermore. As Lord Chancellor Blackwood rolled up the ancient scroll that had sealed her fate, Isabella remained on her knees, her elegant gown pooled around her like the remnants of a shattered dream. The woman who had once commanded the respect and admiration of an entire kingdom was now nothing more than a common criminal awaiting justice. King Edmund rose from his throne with the measured dignity that had characterized his entire reign, his movements deliberate and final. The crown that had felt so heavy with responsibility now seemed to settle more naturally upon his head, as if the act of defending the realm's honor had restored some essential balance to his role as sovereign. He looked down at the woman he had once loved, feeling not hatred but a profound sadness for what might have been if only she had possessed the integrity that her position demanded. "Isabella Montclair," the king pronounced, using her maiden name to emphasize that she was no longer entitled to any royal designation. "You are hereby stripped of all titles, honors, and privileges granted to you through marriage to the crown. Your allowances are terminated immediately, your access to royal properties is permanently revoked, and you are banned from entering any royal residence or representing yourself as having any connection to this monarchy." The guards who had been standing at attention throughout the proceedings now stepped forward to escort Isabella from the throne room. As they approached, she made one final desperate attempt to reach the man she had deceived for so many years. Rising unsteadily to her feet, she stumbled toward the throne with her hands extended in supplication. "Edmund, please," she cried, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine anguish. "I know I've made terrible mistakes, but we can work through this together. Don't let them destroy what we built together. I love you. That was never a lie, never a performance. Everything else can be fixed, made right again." The king's expression remained unmoved by her plea. He had spent the long night contemplating exactly these words, preparing himself for the moment when Isabella would appeal to whatever feelings might remain between them. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the betrayal too complete, and his duty to the kingdom too sacred to be swayed by last-minute protestations of love. "Love cannot exist where trust has been so thoroughly destroyed," Edmund replied with quiet finality. "You speak of building something together, but everything you built was constructed on lies. The woman I thought I loved was a fiction, a character you created to deceive me and steal from my people. I mourn the loss of that fiction, but I will not compound my error by showing mercy to the criminal who destroyed her." Sir Reginald stepped forward with additional documents that had been prepared for this moment. "Your Majesty," he announced formally, "arrangements have been made for the immediate transfer of the accused to the Tower of London, where she will be held pending trial. All of her personal possessions are being catalogued and will be examined for additional evidence. The investigation into her associates and potential accomplices continues." Isabella's face went white at the mention of the Tower, the ancient fortress that had housed prisoners of the crown for nearly 1,000 years. The reality of her situation was finally penetrating through her shock and desperation. This was not a marital dispute that could be resolved through negotiation or compromise. This was a criminal matter that would be pursued with the full force of royal justice. As the guards moved to either side of her, Isabella made one last attempt to maintain some dignity in her final moments as a free woman. She straightened her shoulders, wiped the tears from her face, and looked around the throne room as if trying to memorize every detail. Her gaze lingered on the tapestries depicting the kingdom's glorious history, the same tapestries she had once studied with apparent interest during her early days as queen consort. "I suppose this is how my story ends," she said with bitter irony, her voice steadier now that she had accepted her fate. "The commoner who married a king and lost everything through her own greed and stupidity. I hope the kingdom will remember that some of the charitable work was real, even if the motivation was not." King Edmund felt a flicker of the man he had been before this betrayal, the man who might have found some compassion even for someone who had wronged him so profoundly. But the crown upon his head reminded him that personal feelings were a luxury he could not afford when the welfare of his people was at stake. "The kingdom will remember that justice was done," he replied firmly, "that even those in the highest positions are not above the law, and that the trust of the people is sacred and inviolate. Your true legacy will be the lesson that no one, regardless of rank or privilege, can escape the consequences of betraying that trust." The great doors of the throne room opened once more, and Isabella walked between her guards toward a future that would be very different from anything she had imagined when she first entered the palace as a bride filled with apparent joy and hope. Her footsteps echoed in the vast chamber, each one marking another step away from the life of luxury and privilege she was leaving behind forever. As the doors closed behind her, King Edmund remained standing before his throne, surrounded by the advisors and officials who had helped him navigate this unprecedented crisis. The immediate danger to the crown had been addressed, but the work of rebuilding and restoration was only beginning. The kingdom would need to heal from this betrayal, and trust in the monarchy would need to be carefully rebuilt through consistent, principled action. Sir Reginald approached the throne with a final document requiring the king's signature. It was the formal order establishing a commission to investigate the full extent of Isabella's crimes and to identify any systemic weaknesses that had allowed her schemes to continue undetected for so long. The commission would also be tasked with returning stolen funds to their rightful recipients and ensuring that the charitable organizations that had been compromised could continue their vital work. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald said as he presented the document, "this commission will help ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again. We will strengthen our oversight procedures, improve our security protocols, and create new safeguards to protect both the Crown and the charitable sector from future exploitation." King Edmund signed the document with the same pen that had been used by his predecessors for over 2 centuries, symbolically connecting this act of justice with the long tradition of royal responsibility to the people. As he set down the pen, he felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over the traumatic events of the past day. The weeks and months that followed would bring additional revelations about the scope of Isabella's crimes and the network of accomplices who had helped her carry out her schemes. Marcus Ravencroft would be arrested attempting to flee the country with suitcases full of cash and incriminating documents. Several palace staff members would be dismissed for their role in facilitating Isabella's access to restricted information. The investigation would ultimately reveal that over £70 million had been stolen or misappropriated, making it one of the largest theft cases in the kingdom's history. But on this day, as the sun began to set over Eldermore Castle, King Edmund could take satisfaction in knowing that he had fulfilled his most fundamental duty as sovereign, protecting his people and preserving the integrity of the crown. The personal cost had been enormous, but the principle had been upheld. The kingdom would survive this crisis, as it had survived so many others throughout its long history, because when the moment of testing came, duty had triumphed over personal feeling, and justice had prevailed over privilege. The crown's reckoning was complete, and the realm was secure once more.